I stood frozen in the glittering ballroom, my daughter's furious whisper cutting sharper than glass. "You're embarrassing me, Dad. Can't you ever just act normal?" My heart dropped into the pit of my stomach. Normal. After everything I'd sacrificed, normal wasn't good enough. At that moment, I realized the house I'd just bought her wasn't a gift, it was a mistake. Richard Carter adjusted his tie nervously, staring into the ornate mirror that reflected a version of himself he hardly recognized. The tuxedo expertly tailored felt stiff and alien against his skin. Behind him, the ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers, gold-trimmed tables adorned with extravagant floral centerpieces, and guests whose attire spoke of generations of inherited wealth. He took a deep breath and reminded himself that today wasn't about him. It was Emily's day. Emily, his beautiful, intelligent daughter, the center of his universe since her mother passed away 15 years ago. He'd raised her alone, juggling parenthood with building his construction company from the ground up. Every late night, every aching muscle, every sacrifice had led to this moment, giving Emily the life he'd promised his late wife she'd have. Yet, as Richard scanned the room, he felt acutely aware of his own discomfort. Waiters glided by silently offering champagne flutes. Conversations filled the air, refined laughter, and gentle clinks of crystal glasses, creating a soft symphony of privilege. This wasn't his world. It never had been. Dad, Emily, approached him, breathtaking, in her ivory gown, embroidered with delicate pearls. Her face glowed excitement, dancing in her eyes. "Are you ready for your speech?" Richard smiled warmly, his nervousness melting slightly. "As ready as I'll ever be. You look perfect, sweetheart." She squeezed his hand gently. "Thank you, Dad. Remember, short and sweet, okay?" "I know." He chuckled softly, though the tightness in her voice gave him pause. Was she worried about him embarrassing her? He brushed the thought away, determined not to ruin her special day with his insecurities. Soon enough, the room quieted as the MC announced him. Richard stepped forward, feeling dozens of eyes upon him. He cleared his throat, gazing lovingly at Emily, then began to speak. "When my daughter Emily was born, I held her in my arms, terrified and joyful, promising I'd always be there to protect her, guide her, and love her unconditionally." His voice trembled slightly, emotion thickening his words. "Emily, seeing you today marrying a man you love deeply fills me with pride and hope for your future. I wish you both endless happiness." Then he raised his glass. "To Emily and Daniel, may your love be as strong and enduring as my love for you." Polite applause rippled through the hall, and Richard felt relief washing over him. He had done his part. He hadn't stumbled or said anything inappropriate. As the applause faded, Victoria Hart, Daniel's mother, approached her face, a carefully crafted mask of superiority. Richard's charming speech, though perhaps slightly sentimental. He forced a smile. "Well, Victoria's sentimentality comes naturally on days like today." She gave a patronizing chuckle, then glided away. Richard turned, seeking Emily's reassurance, but instead saw a look of distress cross her face as she quickly approached him. "Dad," Emily whispered sharply, guiding him aside, "you embarrassed me. Can't you ever just act normal? This isn't one of your job sites or those backyard barbecues we used to have. These people expect more sophistication." Richard felt the air escape his lungs. the room suddenly colder, her words cutting deeper than any blade. Normal. His daughter, his pride, ashamed of him. "I'm sorry, Emily," he murmured, voice barely audible. "I didn't mean—" "Forget it," she interrupted sharply, turning swiftly back toward her guests. Richard stood there, frozen, the distance between him and Emily expanding rapidly, and a realization struck him with painful clarity. The beautiful new house he'd just bought her wasn't the generous wedding gift he'd intended. It was a mistake. Richard sat alone in the dimly lit living room of his modest home, the silence heavy around him. His daughter's harsh words echoed in his mind, each repetition intensifying his heartache. He looked around, eyes resting on framed photos lining the mantel and walls, Emily's graduation prom night, their camping trip in Yosemite. Memories captured in smiles and laughter now seemed hollow, distant relics of a bond he'd believed unbreakable. His gaze moved slowly to a worn, leather-bound photo album resting on the coffee table. He reached out, hesitating briefly, then opened it gently, pages crackling softly under his fingertips. There, preserved in photographs, was his life story, their story. Late nights, working overtime, construction sites, bathed in morning twilight, and Emily always smiling, always the reason behind every sacrifice. Richard recalled clearly the long days he spent on scaffolds, the countless weekends he'd sacrificed pouring concrete and hammering nails, building dreams for strangers so he could finance Emily's future. He'd wanted her life to be easier, richer, more comfortable than his own had ever been. He'd vowed she'd never endure the hardship and poverty he'd known in his youth, but tonight those dreams felt more like illusions built on the shifting sands of misguided hopes. He'd been blind to the slow transformation that had overtaken his daughter since her engagement to Daniel Hart, whose affluent background was everything Richard was not. The Hart's lifestyle was refined, cultured, polished, far removed from his humble roots. He remembered vividly the first dinner at the Hart residence, their mansion, a monument of luxury and privilege. Richard had felt awkward, inadequate amidst conversations of art investments and European vacations. Emily had seemed different there, smiling politely, but with a strained politeness he'd never seen before. His heart ached anew as he remembered overhearing Daniel's mother, Victoria, casually remark, "Richard's a nice man, but he's certainly not our sort of people," and Emily's gentle laughter in response. He had ignored the sting at that moment, convinced that he misunderstood, but tonight's confrontation had proven otherwise. Richard sighed deeply, closing the album with finality. He walked toward his desk, switching on the small lamp that illuminated scattered papers and bills. There, beneath the soft glow, lay the legal documents he'd recently signed, papers finalizing the transfer of the brand-new, elegant house he'd purchased as Emily's wedding gift. It was an extravagant home in an upscale neighborhood intended as his ultimate gesture of love and pride. But now the gesture felt bitterly ironic. Emily saw him as an embarrassment, a blemish in her newly acquired elite social circle. Perhaps, he thought bitterly, he'd made a profound mistake. Taking a deep breath, Richard reached for his phone and dialed a familiar number. It rang twice before a voice answered, professional yet warm. "Hello, Richard. It's quite late. Everything okay?" "Yes, Tom," Richard said, slowly feeling the gravity of his decision. "I'm sorry to bother you at this hour, but I need to stop the property transfer for the house on Oakwood Avenue." There was a pause, surprise evident even through the phone. "Richard, are you sure about this? It could be complicated." Richard's voice was steady, resolute. "I'm certain. Please initiate whatever's necessary immediately." "Understood," Tom replied after a moment. "I'll take care of it, first thing in the morning." "Thank you," Richard said softly, ending the call. He leaned back heavily in his chair, closing his eyes as he absorbed the enormity of his choice. He knew there would be fallout. Emily would be furious. But this time he had to be strong to teach a difficult lesson about respect and gratitude. In the quiet solitude of his home, Richard finally allowed himself to acknowledge the painful truth he had lost something precious tonight. But perhaps he had regained something equally valuable, his dignity. Days passed slowly for Richard, each moment weighed down by the burden of his choice. He kept busy at the construction sites, the manual labor offering temporary distraction, but every evening the loneliness and regret seeped back in shadows, chasing him home. On Friday afternoon, after finishing inspections on a new office building downtown, Richard stopped at a cafe, needing a break from the oppressive routine. As he sipped his coffee, he overheard familiar laughter and glanced toward the back of the cafe. Victoria Hart sat with a group of elegantly dressed women, their conversation loud enough to drift toward him clearly. Poor Richard. Victoria's voice dripped with disdain, masked as pity. Can you imagine how awkward he felt at the wedding? So out of place. Emily was mortified, of course. Richard clenched his jaw, gripping the coffee cup tightly. His anger flared, burning away the last remnants of hesitation. Victoria continued, her voice sharp and mocking. "I don't know what Emily sees in that family. It's clear they just don't fit in." He pushed away his coffee, stood quietly, and exited the cafe unnoticed. Outside, the afternoon sun felt too bright, too revealing, as if spotlighting his pain and humiliation. He drove home with a resolve hardening within him, no longer clouded by doubt. Later that evening, Richard sat in his lawyer Tom's comfortable office, facing the final step. Tom leaned back in his chair, looking at him carefully. "You're sure, Richard? Once we file this, Emily will lose all claims to the property. This will cause a major rift." Richard stared at the document on the polished desk, the words stark and unforgiving. "Tom, I've spent my entire life trying to protect and provide for Emily, but somewhere along the line I lost sight of what was truly important. It wasn't money or prestige, it was respect and dignity." Tom nodded slowly, clearly sympathetic, but also professional. "Then sign it, and I'll handle the rest." Richard took the pen, feeling its weight, understanding fully the consequences of the ink that would flow from it. He paused briefly, memories of Emily's laughter and innocence flooding him, momentarily weakening his resolve. But then he remembered her cold stare, her whispered criticism, and the contemptuous tone in Victoria Hart's voice. With one swift movement, he signed his name firmly on the dotted line. Tom took the papers silently, understanding no further words were necessary. Richard rose slowly, feeling simultaneously lighter and heavier, liberated from the chains of ingratitude, but burdened by the looming fallout. As he drove home through streets bathed in twilight, Richard understood deeply that he had set something irreversible in motion. Yet beneath his apprehension simmered a quiet strength. Emily had forced him to confront a painful truth, and he had responded the only way he knew how, by reclaiming his self-respect. Tomorrow Emily would discover the truth. Richard knew it would hurt, but sometimes pain was necessary to grow, to learn, and perhaps eventually to heal. The phone call Richard had been dreading came the next afternoon, sharp and piercing, like a blade through the quiet stillness of his home. "Dad, what have you done?" Emily's voice trembled with anger, disbelief barely masking her tone. "The house the real estate agent called this morning, they said the transfer has been revoked." Richard held the phone tightly, bracing himself. "Yes, Emily, I revoked the transfer." "How could you?" she demanded, hurt, evident beneath her anger. "That was my wedding gift. Everyone knows about it. What am I supposed to tell Daniel's family? They already think." "Think what?" Emily. Richard interrupted, his voice firm but gentle. "That your father isn't good enough. That I'm an embarrassment." A tense silence stretched between them. Emily finally responded, her voice strained and quieter. "You know it's not like that, Dad. You don't fit into this world. You embarrass me sometimes, and I have to fix everything afterward." Richard's heart constricted painfully, yet he stayed strong. "Emily, listen to yourself. You're ashamed of me because I don't meet your in-laws' standards. The very people who mock and disrespect us both. How did we reach this point?" She hesitated, but her tone hardened. "Dad, I can't talk to you right now. I need to sort out this mess." The line clicked dead. Richard stared numbly at the silent phone in his hand. He'd anticipated anger, but the reality of her dismissal cut deeper than he'd imagined. The fallout was swift. Within days, friends and neighbors who once warmly greeted him now avoided eye contact. Rumors spread quickly, painting Richard as vindictive and unstable. Even longtime clients of his construction business began quietly canceling projects, citing vague excuses. Richard felt increasingly isolated. Evenings became long and empty, punctuated only by cold dinners and unanswered messages. He questioned himself daily. Was this necessary? Had he gone too far? But each time doubt crept in, he remembered the sting of Emily's words, the contempt in Victoria Hart's voice, and he knew he had to hold firm. A week after the confrontation with Emily, he encountered Daniel unexpectedly in a grocery store parking lot. Daniel approached cautiously, clearly uncomfortable. "Richard," he began stiffly, "Emily is very upset. I think you might have overreacted." Richard regarded the young man closely, noticing the unease in his eyes. "Daniel, do you truly understand what's happening here? Your family looks down on us, on me. Emily is changing herself just to fit into your world. Is that the marriage you want?" Daniel shifted awkwardly, not meeting Richard's gaze. "My family can be difficult, but Emily chose this. We're happy." Richard sighed deeply. "I want Emily to be happy, Daniel, but happiness built on pretending and shame won't last. Think about that." Without waiting for a response, Richard walked away, leaving Daniel standing alone, visibly shaken. Returning home, Richard felt a heavy sense of loss. His world had fractured, and the aftermath was harsher than he'd expected. Yet beneath the pain, a quiet resolve persisted. The path he'd chosen was difficult, but necessary. For the first time in years, Richard was confronting the truth head-on, no matter the cost. The following weeks became a trial Richard had never imagined enduring. Whispers trailed him everywhere, fueled by stories spun cleverly by Victoria Hart and her influential circle. At the hardware store, Richard felt the cashier's averted gaze. At his favorite diner, he noticed people's sudden hush as he entered. His previously robust social connections were dwindling, leaving him isolated and vulnerable. Then one Saturday morning, Richard opened the local newspaper and felt a punch to the gut. A thinly veiled gossip column described an unnamed prominent businessman cruelly revoking his own daughter's wedding gift out of spite. Although unnamed, the details left no doubt it was about him. The article painted him as petty, vindictive, and incapable of accepting his daughter's newfound happiness. Richard's phone rang incessantly that day, calls from clients politely severing contracts, suppliers suddenly hesitant to work with him. By evening, he felt as if the life he'd built meticulously over decades was crumbling before his eyes. That night, sleepless and agitated, Richard paced his living room. His business, built brick by brick with relentless dedication, was under serious threat. The damage wasn't merely professional, it felt personal, cutting at the core of his self-worth and dignity. Exhausted by stress, he visited the neighborhood park the following afternoon, seeking solace. Sitting alone on a bench, he watched parents pushing laughing children on swings, a bitter reminder of simpler, happier times. He closed his eyes momentarily, feeling the weight of public judgment pressing against him. A gentle voice broke his contemplation. Richard. He opened his eyes to see Margaret Shaw, a longtime neighbor and friend. Her expression was kind, cautious. Margaret Richard acknowledged, softly wary, but relieved to see a familiar face. She sat beside him, her eyes searching his. "Are you all right? I read that horrible article. It didn't sound like you at all." Richard released a shaky breath, feeling his carefully maintained composure slipping. "It's complicated. Emily and we've had a falling out. She thinks I embarrassed her in front of Daniel's family. Now it seems half the town agrees." Margaret shook her head firmly. "Richard, anyone who knows you understands your character. Don't let them destroy what you worked so hard to build. Stand your ground." Her words resonated deeply. For the first time in weeks, Richard felt a flicker of hope. Margaret's sincerity reminded him he wasn't entirely alone. "Thank you, Margaret," he replied, managing a faint smile. "I needed that." Returning home that evening, Richard's resolve began to strengthen again. Public humiliation had tested him, nearly breaking his spirit. But Margaret's reminder of his true worth reignited his determination. He realized that the only way to restore his reputation wasn't through retreat or apology, it was through truth and transparency. If Victoria Hart and her family wanted a battle, Richard would face them head-on, armed with integrity. Sitting at his desk, he opened his laptop, ready to confront the damage directly. It was time the world saw beyond gossip and understood the real story. Richard began his counterattack by quietly gathering information, determined to uncover the truth behind the Hart family's polished facade. His construction work had given him connections throughout the community, and soon discreet inquiries revealed unexpected details. One afternoon at a diner known for discreet conversations, Richard met privately with an old friend, Paul, who worked at a prominent local bank. Over coffee, Paul glanced around carefully before speaking. "Richard, what I'm about to tell you stays between us," Paul began, voice hushed. Richard nodded firmly. "Of course." Paul leaned closer. "Daniel Hart has substantial gambling debts. He's in deep, real deep. His family has been quietly bailing him out, using their influence to keep it under wraps." Richard felt surprise and concern mingled with vindication. "How serious is it?" Paul shook his head gravely. "Hundreds of thousands. If word got out, their reputation would collapse overnight. They're heavily leveraged, counting on Daniel's marriage to Emily and your financial support." Without it, they're vulnerable. Richard thanked Paul sincerely, leaving the diner feeling shaken yet resolute. The secret was worse than he'd imagined. Emily was unaware of the storm she had married into, blissfully ignorant of the Hart family's true financial instability and desperation. That evening, Richard sat alone contemplating his next move. Revealing the truth would hurt Emily deeply, yet withholding it felt wrong, perpetuating a harmful illusion. She deserved honesty, even painful honesty. Deciding he couldn't face her directly yet, Richard carefully composed an email attaching documented evidence Paul had discreetly shared. His fingers trembled slightly as he clicked send, knowing the turmoil it would ignite. The next morning, his phone buzzed furiously. Emily's name flashed on the screen repeatedly, her messages frantic. "What is this, Dad? This can't be true. Daniel wouldn't lie to me like this." Richard waited until she calmed slightly before responding. "Emily, meet me today alone. We need to talk." They met later at a quiet cafe, Emily arriving visibly distressed. Richard noted her red-rimmed eyes and strained expression. Without preamble, she sat across from him, demanding answers. "Explain yourself," she began, coldly placing printouts from the email on the table. "Are you trying to sabotage my marriage now?" Richard's voice was gentle yet firm. "Emily, I know this hurts, but I needed you to see the truth. Daniel and his family have been using us to solve their financial problems." Her voice trembled. "This can't be true. Daniel loves me. Why would he hide something like this?" "Perhaps he's ashamed," Richard replied carefully. "Or maybe he feared losing you. But love built on deception isn't real love, Emily." Emily's anger cracked, replaced by confusion and pain. "I don't know what to believe anymore." "Then take the time you need," Richard encouraged softly. "Investigate this yourself. Make your own decisions, but do it with your eyes open." She left quickly, eyes filled with conflicted emotions. Richard watched her go, knowing he had planted seeds of doubt that could reshape her future. Returning home, he felt drained, yet certain he'd done the right thing. The secret had been revealed, forcing Emily to confront reality. The outcome remained uncertain, but for the first time, Richard felt genuine hope. Months passed, bringing subtle yet meaningful changes in both Richard and Emily's lives. Emily had settled into a modest apartment, thriving at her new job, earning respect through her hard work rather than status or family connections. She embraced simplicity, finding genuine satisfaction in building a life founded on integrity. Meanwhile, Richard slowly regained stability within his community. Margaret Shaw's quiet support encouraged neighbors to see beyond gossip, and gradually former clients returned, offering contracts and renewing trust. Life began to feel stable again, though Richard knew healing his relationship with Emily was the most significant recovery he sought. The chance for true reconciliation came unexpectedly one bright Sunday afternoon at a community event held in the town square. Richard attended, hesitantly aware Emily might also be there. As he wandered among the bustling crowds and cheerful stalls, he noticed a stage set up for local speakers promoting community values and personal growth. To Richard's surprise, Emily stepped onto the stage, microphone in hand. He paused, heart thumping anxiously, unsure what to expect. Emily took a deep breath, her voice clear and steady. Many of you know my father, Richard Carter, and the stories recently spread about him. Today, I want to set the record straight. The crowd hushed, all eyes focused intently on her. My father raised me alone after my mother passed away, sacrificing everything to give me opportunities he never had. I allowed others to influence me to convince me he was somehow inadequate because he didn't fit their superficial standards. Her voice wavered briefly, emotion surfacing. I was wrong, terribly wrong. My father is the kindest, most genuine person I know. He taught me respect, compassion, and integrity values I momentarily forgot. Today, publicly, I want to apologize to him and acknowledge the truth. I've always been proud of my father, even when I foolishly pretended otherwise. Silence filled the square momentarily before applause erupted, warmly genuine and heartfelt. Richard stood, frozen, deeply moved. Tears blurred his vision as Emily stepped down from the stage and approached him. "I'm so sorry, Dad," she whispered, eyes shining with sincerity. "Can you forgive me?" Richard reached out, embracing her tightly, feeling the emotional distance finally collapse completely. Emily, forgiveness was never in doubt. "I'm so proud of the person you're becoming." Their embrace symbolized more than reconciliation. It marked a profound restoration built on newfound respect and mutual honesty. The community's reaction confirmed Richard's hope. Truth and sincerity had finally replaced deception and pretense. As they walked away together, Richard knew their relationship had transformed fundamentally. Past mistakes were not forgotten, but they were accepted, integrated into their shared journey toward mutual understanding and growth. Redemption had been achieved not easily, not without pain, but genuinely through humility, honesty, and the unconditional love that had always defined their bond. In the following days, Emily plunged into a personal investigation, determined to prove Richard wrong, yet increasingly alarmed by the evidence she uncovered. Phone calls, discreet inquiries, and a trail of financial records gradually painted an undeniable portrait of deception. Meanwhile, Richard struggled internally, wishing he could protect Emily from pain, yet understanding the necessity of her discovering the truth firsthand. When Emily finally reached out asking to meet again, Richard braced himself for the difficult conversation ahead. They chose a quiet park bench, neutral ground, beneath the sheltering branches of mature oak trees. Emily arrived, looking drained, her eyes tired from sleepless nights. She sat beside Richard, silence stretching between them initially. "You were right," she admitted finally, her voice small. "Everything was true. Daniel's gambling debts are massive, and his parents, they've lied to me all along." Richard felt no triumph, only profound sadness for her pain. "I'm sorry, Emily. Truly, deeply sorry. I never wanted you hurt like this, but you deserved the truth." She nodded slowly, fighting back tears. "They always made me feel like I had to prove myself worthy. Now I see it clearly. They were just using me, using us." He gently placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Emily, people who truly love you would never force you to prove your worth. Real love accepts you exactly as you are." She wiped her eyes, composing herself. "I don't know what to do now. My marriage feels like a lie, my future uncertain." "Take your time," Richard advised quietly. "Decisions don't need to be rushed. But whatever you choose, make sure it's genuinely your decision, free from manipulation or pressure." Emily sighed deeply, the weight of reality evident in her posture. How did we get here, Dad? How did I let myself lose sight of everything important? Sometimes, Richard replied softly, we become so focused on fitting into someone else's world, we forget our own values. But the important thing is recognizing it and having the courage to change. She hesitated, vulnerability clear in her eyes. Can you ever forgive me for how I treated you? Richard felt his heart swell with compassion. Emily, I already have. Forgiveness isn't conditional, but rebuilding trust that takes effort from both of us. Emily nodded, understanding. I know, and I'm willing to do the work. I promise. Richard stood, offering her his hand. She accepted, rising slowly, symbolizing the first tentative step toward healing. They walked together quietly, each absorbed in reflection, but for the first time in months, they shared a renewed connection, a cautious yet genuine hope. The reckoning had come painful and revealing, yet it also provided clarity and the promise of rebuilding their relationship on a foundation of honesty and respect. A year passed, each season marking gradual but meaningful progress in Richard and Emily's lives. Emily thrived independently, demonstrating strength and resilience she hadn't known she possessed. Her small apartment became a haven of authenticity, reflecting her values and newfound confidence. Professionally, she earned recognition for her integrity and dedication, respected genuinely by her peers. Richard's construction business rebounded, fully growing steadily, fueled by renewed community support and respect. He took immense pride in his work, again feeling the satisfaction that comes from rebuilding not just structures, but his own reputation and self-worth. Their relationship, fully repaired, flourished with mutual respect and honesty at its core. Regular dinners, casual conversations, and shared laughter once again filled their lives, each moment cherished deeply. One warm Sunday afternoon, Richard invited Emily for lunch at his home, the atmosphere relaxed and joyful. Over coffee on the porch afterward, Richard shared a quiet thought he'd been nurturing. I've been thinking of a new project, he began cautiously. A community center downtown focused on supporting young families and single parents. Something that offers real help, resources, and genuine encouragement. Emily smiled warmly, understanding immediately. Inspired by your own journey, he nodded, eyes bright with enthusiasm. Exactly. We've both learned valuable lessons about family respect and dignity. It's time to give back to help others find the strength and support we discovered the hard way. Emily squeezed his hand gently, excitement building. I love it, Dad, and I want to help however I can. Together, they began planning conversations flowing naturally into ideas and possibilities. The project symbolized more than a charitable endeavor. It represented their shared values, the meaningful journey they'd traveled together, and the fresh start they'd earned. Months later, at the grand opening ceremony, Richard stood proudly alongside Emily, cutting the ceremonial ribbon. Cheers and applause filled the sunny afternoon, a testament to their resilience and commitment. Looking around at the gathered crowd, neighbors, friends, supporters, Richard felt a profound sense of fulfillment. Beside him, Emily radiated confidence and sincerity, transformed through struggle into a woman of true strength and character. Later, as the celebration wound down and guests departed, Emily turned to Richard, gratitude clear in her expression. Thank you, Dad. she said softly, voice filled with emotion. "Not just for this, but for never giving up on me, even when I gave up on myself." Richard hugged her warmly, pride overflowing. "Emily, you're stronger and braver than you ever knew. All you needed was to find your own path. I'm honored to walk it with you." Together, they stood quietly, savoring the moment, the culmination of pain, forgiveness, redemption, and ultimately healing. Life had taught them both difficult lessons about pride, humility, and genuine love. Now, armed with those lessons, father and daughter were ready to face whatever future awaited together, stronger and wiser than ever. This was more than just a fresh start. It was a renewed promise, a commitment to each other built on respect, love, and authenticity, the only foundation worth building on. In the aftermath of the revelations, Emily's world underwent a drastic transformation. Confronted with the harsh truths about Daniel and his family, she initially felt paralyzed by disbelief and anger. The carefully constructed fantasy of her marriage dissolved, leaving behind a painful reality that demanded action. Emily began spending less time at the Hart residence, preferring solitude and reflection to confrontations and denial. During these quiet moments, she found herself revisiting memories she'd suppressed: her father's kindness, his tireless support, and the genuine happiness they'd once shared. One evening, as she sorted through personal belongings at her apartment, she discovered an old box filled with keepsakes from her childhood. Inside were heartfelt notes Richard had written for birthdays, school milestones, and simple reminders of his love. Each word felt like a gentle rebuke, a stark contrast to the superficiality she'd accepted from the Harts. Overwhelmed by emotion, Emily picked up her phone and dialed her father's number, her heart pounding nervously. "Hello," Richard answered cautiously. "Dad," she began softly, voice trembling, "I don't know how to start. I was wrong, so terribly wrong. Can we talk?" "Always," Richard replied gently, his tone immediately reassuring. They met shortly after at Richard's house, familiar, yet now slightly strange to Emily after their prolonged distance. Sitting across from each other at the kitchen table, she struggled to find the right words. "I've been reflecting," she started quietly, eyes focused on her clasped hands. "I realized how unfair I've been to you. I allowed Daniel and his family to influence me, to make me ashamed of our life of you. I was blind, Dad, and I'm sorry." Richard listened silently, his expression thoughtful yet compassionate. When Emily finished, he reached across the table, covering her hand with his own. "Emily, acknowledging mistakes is the hardest part. You're brave for facing them, but true change means action, not just words." "I understand," she nodded earnestly. "I've already started. I've officially separated from Daniel, and I'm cutting ties with his family completely. I'm returning to work, rebuilding my life independently without relying on anyone else's expectations." Richard smiled gently, pride evident in his eyes. "It won't be easy, Emily. Independence comes with struggles. But I believe in you. Always have." Tears filled her eyes again, but this time they felt healing rather than painful. "Thank you, Dad, for never giving up on me even when I didn't deserve it." He squeezed her hand warmly. "Love isn't about deserving, Emily. It's unconditional." As they sat quietly together, a newfound sense of peace settled over Emily. Her awakening had been painful yet necessary, stripping away the layers of pretension and revealing a path toward genuine authenticity. Walking away later that night, she felt lighter than she had in years, free from the chains of illusion. Emily understood clearly now redemption was possible, but it required honesty, humility, and courage. With her father's quiet strength guiding her, she was finally ready to embrace her true self.